Welcome back to Listen for Real. I'm Jennifer Brown, and I'm glad you are joining us for this conversation again this week. And I am with a really, really wonderful guest. Her name is Kay Solomon, and we're talking some big stuff today. We are talking domestic abuse, but we are blowing this topic up from the standpoint that many hear those two words, domestic abuse, and they make the typical assumption that it is physical or sexual, maybe verbal. But I have learned and am learning as I talk with Kay that there are many definitions of abuse, many forms it takes, and they're all harmful, insidious, and damaging. And so I'm so thankful Kay is here, and we are going to get into it.
Y'all, listen, okay? We are hard on ourselves as women, and we are hard on each other sometimes. And I asked Kay to be here because a while back we were in another environment together, and I heard her tell a story. I've heard her tell several stories about herself, but she said one phrase as she was telling her story. And she said, I have got to save my own life. And I got chills hearing her say that. And all I could think of was, oh my word, no one else is coming to save us. I remember my friend Jessica Michaels saying that. Kay, you and I both know Jessica. And she said, no one's coming to save us. We decide, we choose. It's up to us. Yeah. And so I really resonated, Kay, with your story. But more importantly, one of the things I'm all about is getting together, having a conversation. I wish we were in the same room, sitting together, but everyone in this audience knows, like, just pull up a chair, pull up a cup of tea, and just enjoy and learn from and soak in a conversation among friends. We are all here together, and we learn from one another, and we sharpen one another, and we encourage each other. We're a stand for each other. So will you go back to that story? And there's so much important wisdom that you carry, both in your lived experience and just in your knowledge base. But would you share a little bit about, I have got to save my own life, and where that came from? And that, by way of your story, I think will give people a little more about you. And then let's just keep talking about everything.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I've got to save my own life. I was married for almost 19 years. 18 years into it, 17 and a half or so, my then husband had a stroke. And for years, I was strongly encouraging him to go to the doctor because his blood pressure was high. He would never listen. He didn't listen to me on a number of things because he thought he knew everything, such as sometimes men do. Yeah. That can be a thing sometimes. So I had been taking care of my husband for a few months, taking a leave of absence from my job as a teacher. And I had been the sole support because I was supporting my husband's entrepreneurial ventures that I had been supporting for years that never amounted to any sort of income or profit. And he was of the age getting ready to be able to file for Social Security. And I said, oh, you can file for Social Security now. And he said, no, I'm going to wait till I get to full retirement age. And it was that, I thought about that for a second, and I was like, I've been supporting us for all this time. And you're not going to contribute in any way when you can. And it was at that moment that I started to figure out a piggy bank. So I let that sort of sit for a minute. And then one day I said to him, I said, I think I'm going to join Toastmasters, because for the longest time, I felt like I was supposed to be speaking somewhere. And he said, no, why don't you wait until after my mom leaves? Because his mom was coming over this summer to help to care for him. And so I tucked that away, and I started to say, wait a minute, he is trying to control my every move. And so I went to summer school. I started teaching summer school, and some other things happened. And finally, one day, I just felt like crap. And that day, I was walking in the bedroom. He was laying in the bed. And I looked at him. And as I was looking at him, in my spirit, right smack in my gut, I could hear it. It didn't come out audible, but I could hear it. And it says, I have got to save my life. It was as real to me as a voice talking to me. And I was like, oh my God, wow. And it was at that moment that I knew that I had to make some changes. I just didn't know what they were yet. And so that's how that began.
But what's so interesting about that is it would be really easy to say, oh, he doesn't hit me.
Yes.
Oh, he doesn't do this. I should be, because I resonate with your background. Many of us who were either raised in or have invested much of our time and identity in certain faith practices take a very specific approach to marriage and partnership and covenant.
Yes.
And it is like you are to put yourself to the side, you are to serve. And as long as you serve and you put your own self-will beneath everyone else, then everything is good. And in fact, that's a relationship that will be richly blessed.
Yes.
And I have come to understand in recent years that that is not true. It's oftentimes what it is you just sacrifice yourself on the altar of those people. That becomes an idol, even before God, and keeping everyone happy and somehow, it's like self-oppression. But we also are in institutions that support that self-oppression and think it's a selfless and good thing. To be selfless is a good thing. And if for me, if God lives within me and that is part of myself and God created me a certain way, it's counterintuitive to what I understand now that God would want me to absolutely eviscerate myself and put myself to the side and make everyone else more important. And then what you're describing. So I know that's at play and I really resonate with that. And I'm sure there's other people listening that do that as well. We all do this as if self-sacrificing is healthy and good. And it isn't necessarily. But also I recognize you are a wise, incredibly strong, highly accomplished, highly educated person. And so you've got like a few systems and institutions you are steeped in that surprisingly don't support you saving your own life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, totally. I mean, exactly what you said, these institutions, the church, right? As women, we are supposed to, I frequently heard in sermons that we are supposed to be our husband's helpmeet, right?
Yep.
Their helpmeet, coming from the book of Genesis, right? And so, and not only that, according to the letter of Ephesians, we are supposed to respect our husbands, we often forget the rest of that passage that,
Mm-hmm.
husbands are supposed to love their wives as Christ loved the church. But there's so much of that sacrificing that in church teaching that both men and women do, that it's all about the woman supporting the man.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, at all costs. And so I did that. And I put aside my aspirations when we got married. And it was an agreement. I can't say that I was forced to do it because I'm thinking that this is what I'm supposed to do. So the agreement was, okay, well, I'll help you get your things started. And, it was like, oh, and I'm going to blow up and then I'll help you. Well, none of that ever happened. And when I questioned, if ever I questioned what he was doing, it was, you don't trust God. God gave me this, and God is going to do this, God is going to do that. And by you questioning, you don't trust God, and therefore you don't trust me. And so it was this placing of guilt that you don't have enough faith. You don't have enough faith, and therefore you're going to hinder me and my business becoming profitable, my calling coming to fruition. I'm going to be the one who is going to be hindering that because we're supposed to be one flesh. As married people, as the scripture says, the two become one. They become one flesh. And so because we're one flesh, as married people in covenant with one another, then I'm going to be the one that's hindering you. And I believe that. And I go back to my journals, and I've written these statements about, I'm sorry, God. I need more faith. I'm a bad wife. I've got this all throughout my journals over the years because of that, because of believing this teaching that I truly believe that it was right and true for the longest time. And even for me in studying this stuff and studying scripture for the longest time, and me still believing that. Yeah, it's a problem with these institutions that are highly patriarchal in nature. And we as women, very often, because we think we are doing God's will, we succumb to that same teaching.
Yeah. And honestly, it is not, if you think about it, I cannot see in any way how it's glorifying to God. Mm-mm. When you think of the majesty of God, when you think of, just the lavishness, none of this fits within God's character. Yeah. And what everything I understand and my experience of God, and I know everyone has their own vision of this and experience of this, and that's perfect here. You and I happen to reference all of this as God. Someone else may call it spirit, source, universe. Totally cool here. Yeah. But what I understand of that power, that infinite, that is all that I live, move, and have my being in. Mm-hmm. None of this jives.
Right. It doesn't.
And so how fortunate, it makes me so sad for those who never know anything different. It's all they've ever known. And do they even hear that murmuring of, I've got to save my own life, or something in my gut? This is not right. This is not what was meant for me. Mm-hmm. So will you go back though? Because I really think it matters to say, we talk about, there's a form of, that's spiritual abuse. It's psychological. It's emotional. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of kinds of abuse. And I like to be really careful with this because that word can be thrown around in ways that are really flippant and minimized.
Yes.
And it is nothing to minimize when people are being oppressed or victimized. But also, I don't want to speak in a way that also doesn't abuse is abuse, but it does take various forms and they all take their toll. And so I can see why you felt, I've got to fix this. I've got to be a better wife. I resonate with those journal entries. My journal could just sit right alongside yours with the self-flagellation of I'm this, I'm bad. If I were just this, if I just did that. I can remember asking people, there was some people who I knew from a different church who literally would lay hands and pray over you for like 8 hours straight because I had to get it right. Clearly the problems in our marriage, because I also come from a situation where I am divorced and I was married about 20 years. And there was some problematic stuff there. And I bought into, this was mostly self-imposed, not so much by my husband, a lot of those same things you said. And I mean, the lengths I was willing to go, the counseling, the small groups, the marriage retreats, the books, the Bible studies. Oh my word. So many.
Yeah.
And that's just hard. So will you talk more about the understanding of abuse? Because you also are building a whole body of work to guide women through wisdom and to equip them and to live out of the mantle and yoke of abusive situations, whatever they are. Will you just talk more about some of the terms around domestic abuse, around financial abuse, et cetera? Because I feel like we got to get some clarity there. And I want people to understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. And in my understanding of it. So for the longest time, nobody was talking about, at least I hadn't heard anything about emotional or psychological abuse. I had never heard anything about that. Usually when you hear about abuse, you hear sexual abuse or and even financial abuse, physical abuse is what you normally associate with domestic violence. I had no understanding of it. So when, for example, my husband would overstep a boundary, when he would, for example, one day he read my journal one day. I was doing morning pages for a long time, and he picked up a book that was clearly not his and read my journal entries. And he said, well, I read it because, I didn't know that it was yours. And then he proceeded to tell me about myself. He's like, I'm really sad about what I read, but these are things that you should have told me. And he used what he read in my journals. He used it against me, and he used the stuff against me often. And instead of me setting a boundary, I thought that I was in the wrong. I said, he's right. He's my husband because of this teaching that I had espoused on myself for so long. And so I thought I was in the wrong. Yet I would feel like crap. I felt like, I said, there is something not right, that this keeps happening. And I felt it, but I ignored it. I ignored it for so long, because one of the other teachings that you sometimes hear in the Christian church is your feelings lie to you. Now I've heard that a lot of times.
Oh my goodness.
So I said, oh, my feelings are lying to me because my husband loves me. He's never hit me. He does all these other things. He takes care of the house. He doesn't have a job and he's not bringing any money in like he said he was, but he takes care of the cars. He takes care of the house. He mows the lawn. He does the landscaping. So it's all fine. I excused it. I excused the behavior. So there was enough good behavior that, according to him, he says, err toward the positive. Don't err on the side of positivity. So when something happens in our relationship, there's some disagreement or something that I don't like, err on the side of positivity. And so when I didn't, I felt guilty because I was ignoring what was on the inside. But there was enough of that built up over the years that when, for example, I was made to feel stupid because maybe I wasn't the best cleaner of the house. I don't like to clean. And I was made to feel inadequate because he would always say, oh, well, I like things in order. Well, stuff wasn't in order. Not to mention, though, that he was a hoarder. But I never mentioned anything about that because what I found that when I confronted him with something, and not even in a confrontational way, but just to bring something up, he would always turn it around so that it was my fault, so that it was something that I was doing. And so every single time, these are just different examples, every single time that I had an issue that I felt inside my heart that I wanted to address something that I felt like he needed to address for us, it was always turned around back on me and something that I was doing. So I was always the blame. So either I was the blame for something, or I was having an affair because of something that he thought that he saw, or I was keeping secrets. Now that was another thing. So everything was always something that I was not doing right.
And these would be fabricated things because you weren't having affairs or doing all these illicit things or whatever.
Right.
He would just decide that and build a narrative around it.
Right.
And then,
well, what he did is he would surprise me at school. So I'd be in my classroom and then he would just pop up. Right. I'm like, okay, whatever. It's, it was an open campus at the time. So I'm like, okay, you're welcome. And he would come and he would, introduce himself. And, every once in a while it would be disruptive. It's like, okay, this is my husband, whatever. And there was a gentleman who worked there, a young man, and he accused me based on something that he thought that he saw. He says, well, why is he over here? I said, well, he's the AV guy for the school. So that's why he's here. Well, I saw him coming out of your classroom. I said, because he was fixing something in my classroom. And from there, for years, he accused me of having an affair with this guy. And one of the things that, he would say is that when people are guilty of stuff, they deny. And so whenever he would mention this guy and what he thought was happening, I just didn't say anything because I wasn't playing the game. Mm-hmm. But he would continue to say it over the years. And so he made up a narrative in his mind. But here's the trick though, Jen. You know how they say if you tell a lie long enough, it becomes the truth. So he would say this so many times that I began to wonder, I'm like, was I talking did he see me talking to him? It started to become where I started to question myself.
Am I in love with the AV guy?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God.
Did I actually do, it was a ridiculous story that he made up about us sitting on the grass at school. And I'm like, well, that's dumb. Because number one, I was new at school. Number two, I'm grown. And number three, I wouldn't be sitting on the grass at school with a whole bunch of kids. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. But then what it did was I found myself, because I didn't want him popping up at school, seeing me near that guy. So whenever I saw him, I would avoid him like literally almost like the plague. I wouldn't even like hardly say hi because I started to question, oh, well, did I look at him in a suggestive way? I just really started to question what it was that I thought was true. And so it was very odd. And so when you add up those things, when you think about the judgment and the accusations and the blame, the throwing up of incidences that have happened that he had absolutely no business knowing, crossing boundaries. When you look at those behaviors, those aren't normal behaviors. Those are not behaviors that they're not normal behaviors that should exist in a normal, healthy relationship. But that's what I experienced over mine. And in thinking that I had to fix myself, I said, once I fix myself, all that'll go away. That was my thought process. But it's hard to try to fix something when you're angry all the time because your boundaries have been crossed, because you're being blamed for stuff that you didn't do, or you're being criticized for your weight, or any myriad of things. And so what's insidious about it is that when you think about it, it doesn't look like abuse because you're not being hit. It doesn't look like it. So it looks like, oh, that's just a miscommunication. That's just a misunderstanding. And what people miss is there's some really super down deep, covert things that are happening, that person is doing this to manipulate you and to control you. But you don't know that that's what it is that's going on. And so it's strange when you're in the midst of it. But what also happens is you know that something is not right, but you don't want to tell anybody because you think that they're going to say either, well, why don't you just leave? Or, oh, well, you're just, you're overreacting.
Grateful, overreacting.
Yes, right. He doesn't hit you, does he? Like, no. And so you don't want to feel dumb. And so you just sort of keep it inside. And so I didn't share any of this with anybody. Although I think a couple of people suspected that there wasn't something that was not right.
It's also that, tell me more about that question. I think this is really important as we are a stand for one another. And this is not just a women's problem. I want to be really clear. There are people who gaslight and manipulate and control and abuse their partners, their family members. It is not just husband and wife.
You're right.
I want to make super clear. But I remember I'm thinking about Glennon Doyle has a quote, and it just keeps coming to mind as you were talking. And she said something to the effect of, I will no longer remain in a relationship or an institution or any setting that causes me to insult my own soul. And so I think no matter how we label it, abuse or whatever, I feel like that's the litmus test. Is this causing me to insult my very own soul and spirit?
Yeah.
And if something's not right there, we need to look at it. But here's the crazy part about what you said earlier. I do believe we are called upon. We can't change other people.
Right.
We are only able to change ourselves. So I do get why you went, well, it's on me. I need to look at how do I need to change? How do I need to grow? How do I need to have more faith? I honor that, because that is it's a fool's errand to constantly go and go, you have to change, you're doing everything wrong and I'm not. And so therefore that's the problem in the relationship. We don't have the power to make other people change. They have to want to do that.
Right.
And it's the classic serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, that's me, and wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I see how that can happen. So what I want to ask though is, how can we be more of a stand for one another when we say, well, he doesn't hit you, or, well, why don't you leave? Okay, why don't you leave? Because it's not that easy either. This is such a process and a reckoning to come to. So will you talk more about like what held you back from even being asked that question? Because I know some of it is hinged on, you are a smart woman. And so we go, I'm a smart person. How did I get here? I know that's how I think. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, that was totally. I said, if I were so smart, I've got like these degrees. If I was so smart, how am I letting this person do this to me? And what I thought about as I would think about that. So, and I think my mom suspected, I mean, she's my mom. Our moms know. My mom suspected, but I never said anything to anyone about it. And for a couple of reasons. For me, one of the reasons is I have a child, and the conventional wisdom is a child needs two parents. And so when I was growing up, my parents, I love my parents. They did the best they could. They didn't have Oprah when they were growing up, so, all of the things that she's talked about that, have helped us to grow and that sort of thing. They didn't have that. So they didn't have a good relationship. I saw how they would fight and then they wouldn't speak to each other for months. Wow. It still bothers me. I mean, literally for months, and sleep in the same bed. But they stayed together. So there was always somebody at home when we came home from school. We were not latchkey children. There was always somebody home. And so, and then you think about the church teaching. And so I said, I want my daughter to have two parents in the home. And so I'm going to do everything that I can do to make that happen. And so I think one of the questions that we need to ask is, what obligation do you believe that you have to your child if they're children? Because if there are children in the mix, it does complicate things. It really does complicate things. And so I think that is something that we need to consider before somebody says, well, why don't you just leave? Because it's not that simple. There are other people that are involved in that situation. The other is, thinking about, well, if you've been tied together for any length of time, there are some financial considerations there too. And that can, depending on what your situation is, that can be scary. So for some women, if they are in a 2-income household and they have a certain lifestyle, the reality is you think about, how is this going to affect my lifestyle if I leave? And so, and it's not as simple, it's not as simple as, well, just get up and go, find your own place. It's not that simple. I had to think about it from the breadwinner's perspective, which was really, it was kind of hard because I had been the primary breadwinner for, in a lot of states, if it's over 10 years, then in a divorce proceeding, the spouse is entitled to half at least to maintain the lifestyle. That's in the law. That was a law that was created decades ago, decades and decades. Initially, when women weren't the primary breadwinners. And so when the divorce did happen, to make sure that she was taken care of, make sure that the husband um, um, paid some financial restitution. Mm-hmm. But now that was coming back on me because I was the primary breadwinner. And I had to think about, oh my God, half. So the financial considerations can make things scary too. But the other thing that's really important is that in these relationships, it's not always all bad. It's not always all bad. And so you do have good times in the relationship. And that's what makes it confusing, because there are some good times. You know, you can go a stretch and things be fine. And then there it happens. And then that's where the confusion, that's where the cognitive dissonance comes in. Like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And so on the outside looking in, people see this person who seems to be personable and fun and smart. They see somebody totally different. And for a time, so did I. I would see, I'm like, oh yeah, he's funny, he's caring. And then whatever it is that happens, however, whatever it, comes to mind that day, then it just all goes to pot. And so you do get confused, and then you start thinking, oh, well, all relationships go through this. Everybody has, some challenging times in their relationships. That's normal. But then you have to ask yourself, what's normal? Mm-hmm. Is it normal to feel like, there's something wrong with you all the time? Is that healthy? Is it okay? Not just your regular, self-help, personal development, but you're really feeling like crap. You're really feeling like, wow, I'm the one who's making this bad all the time. And I think that's where the difference comes in, is knowing where there's the line that says, okay, you're experiencing, just the regular sorts of relationship issues that, people go through, or are you experiencing, control and manipulation, as you said, gaslighting, making you think you're crazy, and, making you think that your feelings are wrong. Where is that line? And I think that that's what makes it difficult too. And so you just don't want to deal with feeling like, man, I shouldn't be in this situation. I'm smarter than this. And you don't want anybody to know. And you isolate yourself. I isolated myself for years.
Because you didn't even want to be asked. It's like, yeah.
Didn't want to be asked. It was embarrassing. It was literally embarrassing. And so I would make excuses. I'd make excuses for him for whatever, oh, well, he's not working because he's working on, his big dream. And, he's really close. It's going to happen. And people see it, so in my neighborhood, he's out in the yard a lot. And one of the neighbors, who I didn't even know her, but her son, and this was when my daughter was littler, I think she was in middle school. And the neighbors would see, that man doesn't work. And the boy mentioned to my daughter on the school bus, she's in middle school, and she shared this with me. And she said, well, so-and-so said, well, the reason why, your dad is lazy, he doesn't even work. And so people on the outside see clues that things are not right. And even that is embarrassing. So the thing, how do you explain that? He's working on his big dream. He's an entrepreneur. You'll see it's getting ready to happen any day now, knowing good and well that you don't see any signs of it. So it's insidious. It wastes a lot of your time. It takes so much of your time. And yeah, it's a lot of time that you feel like, what did I do all of those years?
Oh my word. Yeah. It's draining.
Why did I insist on staying? But once again, like I said, it wasn't always all bad. But what I do feel really guilty about, so I'm better about this right now that I've gone through this process, is that it wasn't just his behavior wasn't just directed at me. It was also directed at my daughter in similar ways. And I would see it sometimes, like the way he talked to her and some of the things that he would say to her. And I would feel bad, but I thought, we've got to present a united front as a couple. And so I remember one day she said to me, I think she was like in 7th or 8th grade. She says, "Mama, I want you to read my journal." I said, "Okay." Oh. And I read her journal and I literally cried because her dad would berate her about not reading a chapter of Proverbs every day, or you can't eat that ice cream. You didn't work out today. She's like 13. Or any number of things. It was always about him and always meeting his needs at all costs. And so when I read her journal, she made reference to some of the things that he said and how it made her feel. And she didn't blame him. She blamed herself, so much so that she got close to cutting. And even then, I wasn't thinking about something is wrong. And so when I think about even that situation, it made me feel like I didn't protect her. I didn't protect her. It wasn't until really when I decided to divorce him that I saw the full magnitude of his treatment of her and what he did. And so I started getting her some counseling. Not too long after I made the decision that I was going to divorce him, because I started seeing, and the day that she texted me crying was the day that I said, this is the last straw. This cannot ever happen again. She cannot go to school and feeling like this, because there was some sort of way that he wanted to make her feel. And we were driving home from the counselor one day, and she said, well, we were talking about work, and she says, yeah, Dad would talk about your boyfriend. And I said, oh, he was just talking about my job, because I spent a lot of time at my job. My place of employment was my solace for a lot of years. And so after the school day ended, if I didn't have a meeting, because from time to time I would have a meeting after work for one of my extracurricular responsibilities, and I would call him, because I had to call him on my lunch break every day, so that he would know that I was thinking about him. Mm-hmm. And if I didn't call him, he would say, "You didn't call me." Like, I was busy. Well, and so then he would make me feel guilty about that. And so I said, "Oh, he was just talking about Westminster. That's where I work. He was just talking about my job." She said, "No, he wasn't. He said that you had a boyfriend." And he told her this when she was like 9 or 10 years old. And I had no idea. And then she would tell me about all of the things that he would say about me to her. I had no idea of. And I said to myself, that was abusive.
Totally.
For, him pitting her against me. So it's these different things. When you talk about them as a single incident, it doesn't sound like much. But when you talk about it in as a collection, as a collection of stories, then you start to see patterns. Taking one little thing and talking about it, someone would say, "Oh, well, that's nothing. Oh, that's just the relationship thing." But it's not. And so when we minimize other women's experiences,
Yes.
I think that that causes us to want to stay silent. And so what I think is really super important is to educate ourselves on what these behaviors are.
Yeah.
What does it mean to gaslight somebody? What does that feel like?
Mm-hmm.
Are you feeling like you're made to feel like this thing didn't happen when it did, or vice versa? Are you made to feel like your feelings don't matter, or you're being too emotional? Are you being made to feel like you're not good enough? All of those behaviors, we need to support women and ask those questions. Those are the kinds of questions we need to try to engage a woman with, as opposed to, "Why don't you just leave?" When we open up, when we give space to actually allow women safe space, not just any space, but safe space, when a woman can trust that all we're going to do is listen, because sometimes that's all that's needed.
Yep.
Not to give advice, but just to be a conduit of, like, just being able to hear what it is that she's saying. "Yeah, I've been feeling like crap. Yeah, I feel like I'm being judged. I'm blamed for everything. It's always my fault." When she can articulate those things, then I think that starts to open a door to greater understanding, when she can actually articulate those things. Because the other thing is that counseling is expensive. When you don't know, it's like, well, I feel like I need a counselor. And in very many cases, I believe in therapy. And so if anyone is experiencing any sort of psychological, not to mention physical, because we know physical and sexual abuse, those, you see it. It's out there externally. The psychological and the emotional is not. And that's when you can't keep it inside. You have to be able to talk about what it is that you're experiencing and why you're experiencing it. And so if we can offer just space to let women just talk openly and honestly, with no judgment and no blame.
Yeah.
But we have to know what those signs are too. We have to educate ourselves on what is gaslighting.
Right.
What is love bombing? The love bombing.
What's love bombing? I don't know that term.
that's when, and you see it can happen at any point in time in a relationship. I'm most familiar with it at the beginning, is when you meet someone and you're enjoying one another's company, and it's like it goes really, really, really fast, where the other person, and I'm just going to say man because that's my context, is trying to do everything possible to get you hooked, and to get you hooked really fast, whether that's buying presents, going to dinner, and maybe in 3 or 5 days, I love you. So you get that emotional attachment very, very, very quickly, as opposed to really getting to know somebody. Once that the person is bombing you with the attention and the affection, and always wanting to spend time with you all the time. Those are and so when that happens, it's like, oh, that person really loves me.
Mhm.
Oh, he loves me. He wants to spend time with me all the time.
Oh, and everyone else who would see that would be like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Look at it.
Exactly.
Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like
Exactly.
they'd affirm that.
Mm-hmm.
So you feel it. You're getting all the serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine hits up the yin yang. And then you have people around you going, oh my gosh, he's so good to you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Oh, that is interesting. I never heard of love bombing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a thing. And so and especially when, like, my now ex-husband, he gave me the key to his apartment like the first week that we met. And I was like, oh, it's because, he wants me to know that, he can trust that I can trust him. Right. Oh, given that, And at first I thought that was, cool. Now I didn't initially give him a key to mine. I ultimately did. But then by that time, like, the connection is made. So that gives him free reign to, for example, go to my place and trample all over my boundaries when I didn't ask him to do it. Yeah. So the love bombing, it gets you hooked, and you're spending all this time where now you're being isolated from your family and friends because you're spending so much time with him. So it's a way, it's a tactic to get you away from the people that love you and that care for you and that will tell you about yourself. So it's another tactic. It's, as insidious as gaslighting and all of these other things that we see from these types of people in these toxic relationships.
So what strikes me is how absolutely vital it is that all of us believe one another and believe ourselves.
The believing ourselves is the thing, Jen.
I know it.
Yeah.
I know it.
Oh.
But it's also, it's being, instead of telling someone how to fix their life, instead of telling them they're wrong or they're right, or they should stay or they should go, what if we just believe each other and then be that safe space to listen deeply to someone and let them verbally process it. I'm a verbal processor. So I know that when I talk something through with you that's bothering me, or I'm trying to get your feedback on it, a lot of it is really, I'm just trying to process it. And for me, I process when I say things aloud, often in conversation with someone else. So how important it is that we believe one another, believe ourselves when there's that little inkling or that little voice or that little twinge, because I have to wonder, there were, like, I look at things in my life where I had little twinges, little gut reactions, little signs that I went ahead and just ignored, but I definitely had them. And then finally it comes in that audible voice, you have to save your own life, like you experienced. So was that your experience as well?
Yes.
That all along the way, you knew this was not right and this is not the way you deserve to be treated. etc.
Mhm.
But
Totally.
but for all of the various reasons you listed that I resonate with, for sure, money, kids, our houses of faith where it's completely frowned upon. You just keep pushing forward, and I said this in one of my other podcasts on marriage, that the Holy Grail is you are a marriage of majority where you last forever and for a really long time.
Yeah.
And it's these quantity of years versus a quality of care and relationship and companionship and serving one another.
Yeah.
And really caring for that soul, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's really important. We need to believe ourselves, even
Mm-hmm.
when we're not even sure what that feeling is that we're feeling in our body or in our heart or our mind.
Right.
Or something's just not sitting right with our soul.
Mm-hmm.
Something's not right. And just
totally
taking a minute with that. And then believing each other and being a stand for the other person without judgment. Boy, we're already such critics of ourselves, and we hold ourselves with such judgment. We got to be really compassionate and careful about judging another. In this case, I'm going to use our example of another woman in a marriage and how that is for her, and what there are so many kinds of abuse and harm. You listed literally a list a mile long of all kinds of things that are just insidious and on their own might seem like, oh, it's just a miscommunication. Oh, he's just a little jealous, or, oh, but then you start to, I'm so appreciative of the fact, because it's not the easiest thing in the world to just bare your soul like this. But I really believe we find ourselves in other people's stories and their lived experience. And so I am not the only one who resonates and hear myself in your story. I believe there are other people as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Totally. And I think that when you've been, for me, and like you, Jen, when I felt that there was something wrong, when I literally would feel in my body, and it was usually in my stomach all the time, I would ignore it. I wouldn't touch it. I literally said, go away. And I did not start understanding the importance. I did not understand that what that was actually my wisdom. I did not understand that. I certainly didn't attribute it to the Spirit of God because it just felt crappy.
wow.
But I did not understand until a year ago with Woman Speak what that actually was. That this is wisdom trying to talk to you, trying to give you a message. And when I started exploring that idea that there's wisdom in my body, like I resisted that for a while.
Oh,
like,
yeah, me too.
Right?
Yeah,
like,
what?
It's in your head.
On.
What are you talking about?
Yeah.
That's, I've got an education, right? I spent years going to school. It's in your head. And so for a while, I resisted that idea that there's wisdom in your body and it'll talk, just listen to it. I'm like, right? And after a while, I started paying attention to that. And I said, oh, wow. And it started to feel good. It started to literally, and then as I was paying attention to it, I'd give it an opportunity to speak.
Yeah.
Like I would give my body the opportunity through the movement, through my favorite practice, through my meditation. Oh my God. Meditation was life-changing for me in this whole process because I was able, my breath being the conduit to my body. And so
Wow.
you mentioned earlier how the way the church teaches who we are as spouses, as wives, and the teaching that we're supposed to be, the helpmeet and sacrifice our lives and all of that, totally inconsistent with what I know scripture says, because I go back to the breath that we are created in the image of God, and God breathed life. And if that is the case, there is no, number one, there is no subservience. But number two, that breath is the life of God. And I used that as my focal point in my meditations. And so every day when I did that, I started meditating July of 2019. I wrote it in my journal. That was right after I said, I've got to save my life. It was right after that I started finding this teaching. And I had it in my house. I had this book in my house for years by John Kabat-Zinn, and it never resonated with me. When I bought the book years ago, I was like, what is this? Why is that? And I put it in a box, put it away. That July, that day, I remembered exactly where the book was. I went to my closet, I got it out of the closet, and I started reading that book. And I started following the directions on how to meditate. And that's when just stuff blew wide open for me, just blew open. And beginning to understand the importance of listening to your body. For me, it's through my breath. And it's been totally, totally life-changing, absolutely life-changing. And so as I was going through the whole, as I was deciding on, okay, I'm divorcing, I'm doing, all the things that I was thinking about, that meditation grounded me so much every single day, every single day, to the point where I could listen and I could observe what was going on around me and the messages that God was giving to me during that time, and the guidance that he was giving me during that time. It came through me learning how to listen, because the breath was that conduit. It was totally amazing. So stuff would happen, and I call them breadcrumbs. It was like God was putting breadcrumbs in front of me almost every single day.
Oh my gosh, true that. Oh yeah.
It was like uncanny. And I tell this story all the time. Everything that I needed, every step of the way, I never did not know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It was totally amazing, but it was listening. It was that listening, not ignoring anymore those sensations in my body. And I think that when women understand that, there's so many like embodiment practices now. When women, I think when we give space for women to explore that, right? If we give them, so for example, something's not right. You can't put your fingers on it. You're going. You're trying to make sure everything is, you're trying to, make sure that your husband feels, that you're doing what you need to do for your husband, and making sure that your children are taken care of, making sure that the house is safe. All of that stuff, you're so busy, you're not listening to the wisdom. So if we give the space for just helping women to just stop. Let's just stop. Let's just take a breath. Oh, and just feel into that. And then listen. What is your body? Or what is the spirit? Or what is whatever term you use?
Mm-hmm.
What is it telling you? That's sort of my mission, is like to give women that space to be able to explore that wisdom inside of them, to be able to articulate what is inside of them. Because when we don't do that, when we allow ourselves, when we don't explore, let me say that, when we don't explore that thing that doesn't feel right, it keeps us bound up in doing the things that we're not supposed to be doing. God totally has a call on everybody's life, totally, to make an impact in their own circles of influence. And when we're bound up in these toxic situations and these relationships, we can't we can't be who God has created us to be. And we're always, if we don't listen to that wisdom inside that says something is wrong, we're always going to be stuck in that place. So we'll never be able to be who we're called to be. And that's what I think, that's sort of my mission, is to help women get to understand this is what you're experiencing right now. Don't ignore it. Explore it, and don't be afraid of it.
Right.
Don't be afraid, because it is scary. It is scary when it's like you've been married for however long. It doesn't even matter how long it is.
Doesn't matter.
You have established this way of life, and now it might change.
Mm-hmm.
And change is always scary.
Right.
But what's on the other side of it, though?
Mm-hmm.
What there is something on the other side for you. So it's okay to be afraid.
It's okay to be afraid. And it doesn't mean necessarily what you think that fear is telling you it means. Mm-hmm. It's okay to just be curious, ask questions of the feeling and of the fear and of the pain. Ask questions of it, explore it. And I love that visual of breathing into it and going, more will be revealed. Would you, whatever it is you subscribe to, whether it's self, whether it's God, whether it's universe, spirit, love, eternal one, infinite, there are answers and more will be revealed. And it's okay to just feel into it and ask questions of the fear, as opposed to just burying it or running past it or ignoring it. It's that whole, and tell me if this is something you and I have talked about, or was this maybe a conversation I had with Stacey Rowan on my previous podcast. But she said, I think it was Stacey, she said, the mind is the voice of the ego.
Yeah.
The body is the voice of your spirit and soul. But we stay up here in our mind. I talk about almost every podcast because clearly I'm meant to receive this and learn this. I am clearly on that path. And so that's why it's always front of mind and I'm always talking about it, right? Is that boy, the mind can be, really tricky.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's something that you said, there was an expression that you talked about it, about the mind, like it wasn't a hijack. It was this really compelling picture that you painted, that our minds hijack us. That's not what you used, though. It was much more compelling than that.
Yeah, it bullied my body and my soul and spirit into quiet submission. It ran a totalitarian regime.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Oh, yes. That's some wordsmithing, y'all. That is some wordsmithing.
Yeah.
But it's real. It's real.
Yeah, it's real because that's what makes sense, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what makes sense. And we need to, I think, give ourselves, number one, know that our bodies, that's where our wisdom is. And then give ourselves the space to explore that. And as you said, to be curious, not even that the answers are always going to come right away, because they don't all the time.
No.
But to know that, to explore, I really honestly feel like when we come to these realizations that God smiles. I do. I honestly believe that God smiles. And so, let's give each other the space and and I hate to say it like this, but the benefit of a doubt, right? This is your sister. And we are all, it's time out for the competition. And, let's communicate, let's be in community with one another and just support each other. And I think that when we can do that, I think more women, and as you said, it's not just women that are experiencing these kinds of things, but this is the space where I am. This is my audience as women. So let's give one another the space and the opportunity to just tell one another, tell their stories, and for us to just listen.
Yeah.
And I think that is in some ways the best gift that you can give a woman who is looking to feel better, to feel like she is whole. About a month before my ex-husband left my house, because after he had become disabled, but he got a nice settlement, so but about a month before he left, he was in my kitchen and he was saying something, and he said, "You were a mess when I met you." Now, if he had said that to me a year before that, I would have had a much different reaction than what I had. And I may have even internalized that. I may have even started ruminating in my head, like all of the different experiences that I had that he was privy to, that, put together would suggest to anybody, maybe I was a mess. But, and then and a year prior to that, I would have internalized that, and I would have been like, yeah, you're right. Oh, I got to fix that. When he said that to me that day, I just looked at him and I simply thought to myself, I said, there's a lot of pain there. There's a lot of pain there. And I didn't internalize it that time. And I can only attribute it to the fact that I gave myself space. I decided I had to take my life. And that's what I did. I said, no longer. I set the boundary. I said, you will never do this again to us. And it was from then on that, with my meditation and prayer and community with women, that has just been a glorious, glorious time. My life is totally golden right now. It's not perfect, but, at this point, I go hiking regularly with my friends outside when it's cold. And I never thought that I would do that. Spending so much time with my daughter before she gets ready to go to college. Just really exploring the things that I felt like I was supposed to be exploring years ago. And so once I made that decision and started doing the things that did save my life, it's been amazing. And so that's going to look different for everybody, right? It's not going to look the same. And so I think what's important is getting with yourself. Stop ignoring yourself. Stop ignoring.
I was just going to say that. That's the path forward. I love that the name of your body of work and the work you do with women is Walking in Wisdom's Footsteps, because all I could keep thinking was, that's the path forward. holding
Yeah.
space for ourselves
Yeah.
and giving ourselves that space to think, process, feel something.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then do the same for others.
Mhm.
Do the same for
Absolutely.
others.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like you are, you're incredible at that. You've held space right here. I feel as though we just held like this beautiful container and that everyone listening is right here with us and that space is being held. And it is. I mean, y'all, you can connect with us on Instagram. It's in the show notes.
Mhm.
I'm at Being Real Jen, and Kay is at Walking in Wisdom's Footsteps.
Women walking in wisdom's footsteps.
Women walking in wisdom's footsteps. A lot of W's. Yes. And I love that. I love that. We need to be a stand for one another. And have that space and it sometimes just starts with a little quiet conversation with ourselves or just some deep breath and listening and then conversations with other people. And that's what we're doing here. That's what we're doing here. And I'm grateful for you, my friend. Thank you for just being so willing to own your stuff and share it so fearlessly, because I promise you, we find ourselves in other people's stories when when they're willing to do that. Yeah. And gosh, ladies and gentlemen, all humans who are listening right now, however you identify and whoever you are a soul that's listening and having this conversation with us. And we just see you and are standing with you and want you to have that space where you breathe deep and can meditate a little and feel something. And honestly, be in the relationships and the places and the organizations that do not insult your soul. I mean, that's what this is about, really.
Yeah.
And living joyfully and fully. So that's my prayer for all of us, honestly. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. Thanks, my friend, for being here.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you for the opportunity and the conversation. I so enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. All right, y'all. We will see you again next week. And until then, I don't think it's any more appropriate than for me to say right now, listen for real, listen for real deeply within and to that power that's around you and to other people, because that's where so much magic happens and there's so many answers in it. So we'll see you next time. Listen for Real is produced in Rockland, California, and is edited and mixed with the help of Mark Edward. Our music, entitled Zero, is written and performed by Shannon Curtis. If you believe conversations like these belong in the world, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And even better, share it with someone else as a real conversation starter. We'll see you next time.